Hello and welcome to the JSA studio. I am your host, as always, Nathan, and today I'm coming at you with another video, this time the top 10 players at every defensive position. But before we can get into that, I need to preface this by saying the obvious. I have had many bad takes during my time doing this, the vast majority of which has not been on YouTube, because I just did this for fun for about 7 years before I ever posted my first YouTube video. So whether it's Zach Wilson, Sam Darnold, or John Ross, all of which I was extraordinarily high on, I am wrong quite a bit. I'm also right quite a bit, but I don't particularly talk about it because it's very easy to talk about when you're right. And to be entirely honest with you, if you picked 20 random names that were most likely going to get drafted and then said, I am way higher on these 20 people than everybody else does, the chances that you're going to hit on 2 or 3 of those guys are very good. And then all of a sudden, if you go back 7 years, like I have grades going back to 2015, then you can point out all these things where you're like, oh, I was really high on that guy and nobody else was, even though 75% of the takes you had were wrong. The point is, it's very easy to only talk about your good takes and never mention your bad takes or where you were wrong. Even professionals are wrong far more often than they are right. Every now and then you'll get somebody that's really hot and they'll have a good 4 to 5 year stretch, and then they'll fall off a cliff. So take this for what it is. Just some random asshole on the internet giving you his opinion. And now, with the intro done and out of the way, there's only one thing left to do, and that's to ask you to please subscribe to this channel, like this video, and leave a comment down in the comment section below. And now that that's done, we can go ahead and get started, starting with the nose tackle group. First thing you may notice with my nose tackle grades is that they top out at a top 20 grade. And that is because the way that football is played at the professional level, nose tackles are inherently less valuable than other positions. And I don't really think there's a whole lot that a nose tackle can do to justify a top 10 pick. I think there are probably only 2 nose tackles in the NFL that retrospectively are good enough to warrant a top 10 selection: Vita Vea and Dexter Lawrence. And this isn't a particularly good class for nose tackles. I only have 7 with draftable grades, but I don't have a whole lot of nose tackles in general with draftable grades, just because I'm pretty harsh on the nose tackle position, especially when it comes to rushing the passer. And T'Vondre Sweat is the only real player in this class where I think he has upside as a pass rusher and could maybe be a guy that could consistently get you 5 or 6 sacks and maybe 20 or so pressures in a year, 20 to 25 or so pressures. He's not someone who I think is going to stay on the field in obvious passing situations, like if it's 3rd and 10. I don't think T'Vondre Sweat is going to be on the field. However, I do think he is someone that you could keep on the field on 2nd and 7, where it might be a pass play or it might be a run play. So I think he is someone who could stay on the field in those types of situations, but he's still someone that you're probably going to want to take off the field in obvious passing situations. McKinley Jackson out of Texas A&M is my number 2 player. He and my number 3 player, Christian Boyd out of Northern Iowa, both have top 100 grades for me. I think they are both year 1 going to be effective 1-down players or goal line / short yardage players, meaning that I think they will have value in a very specific situation. However, I think they have the athletic upside and potential to turn into the sort of player where you could keep on the field in case it is a run play, even though there's also a good chance that it could be a pass play as well. The next group of guys here, Jordan Jefferson out of LSU, Justin Rogers out of Auburn, Zion Logue out of Georgia, and Evan Anderson out of Florida Atlantic University are all guys that I think have upside, potentially not immediately, but I think have upside as a situational nose tackle who's really only in there to stop the run because it's an obvious run situation. And having a player that can do that is still something that is somewhat valuable in the NFL even today in this pass happy league. Next group of guys, Nazir Stackhouse out of Georgia, Jaden Crumedy out of Mississippi State, and Jermaine Lowe out of Louisville. They are all guys that I also think have that sort of upside, but I'm less confident in their ability to eventually turn into contributors. Next up is the 3-tech position, or what is usually just referred to as a defensive tackle. Not necessarily a nose tackle, but rather a defensive tackle. And the thing that you notice here is this group of players, the 3 techniques, have the extra special distinction of potentially having a top 3 grade. The only real difference between a top 3 and a top 5 grade is that a top 3 grade means that I would take you with the first overall pick of the draft. But I don't really think there's a guy like that in this draft class here. Even though I honestly really like this 3 technique class that we have going on here. As we go down the board here, we'll start at number 1. Byron Murphy out of Texas and Johnny Newton out of Illinois. I both have top 20 grades on them. However, I will specify here, I have not finalized official numerical grades, but I think Byron Murphy will likely end up at the top end of a top 20 grade, and Johnny Newton will likely end up more towards the bottom end of a top 20 grade. But I think maybe one of the biggest risers and perhaps the biggest shock that I had when watching film and just throughout the offseason process was Braden Fisk out of Florida State. I do have a first-round grade on him as a 3 technique. Out of Florida State, he is a textbook definition of a 3 technique penetrator. However, unlike a lot of guys with his physical build that I don't really like that much, a good example of that would be Kalijah Cansey, who last year I was not very high on really at all. I had a top 75 grade on him, I think. But Braden Fisk, unlike Kalijah Cansey in my opinion, was actually stout against the run and didn't just get absolutely obliterated when anybody got their hands on him. Although I do think that is going to be a struggle with him early on in the career. However, I do think that he has the potential to potentially put on 5 to 10 pounds or so and still be able to keep his quickness and penetrating ability, and that'll help him survive in the run game a little bit more. However, the fact of the matter is that Braden Fisk is not going to be someone that you're going to want to put on the inside and ask him to be a run stopper. He's just not that type of player. He doesn't have that type of upside. However, kind of like with the nose tackle group where I talked about the guys that are really only there on first down to stop the run, and then on 2nd and 7, maybe if they're on the higher end of that spectrum, then they could stay in there and potentially get a pressure every now and then. Braden Fisk is the opposite of that. If it's first down, you probably don't really want him on the field, or if it's an obvious run situation. On 2nd and 7, if the personnel tells you it's going to be a pass, then probably you want to put out Fisk. If not, you probably keep him on the sideline until 3rd down, at least early on in his career. That's sort of the way that I view him as a prospect right now. Chris Jenkins is in a similar boat, but I think he has less pass rush upside, but a significant amount more of a run stopper upside. I think he's likely going to go in the middle of the 2nd round to either potentially the Chargers in maybe a trade down position, because I do kind of need that 3 technique, 5 technique kind of guy who plays on the outside in base but then gets kicked inside during passing situations, which is the sort of role that Chris Jenkins is likely to fill at the next level. Potentially the Baltimore Ravens are another team that could look at him, as well as the Seattle Seahawks, who would actually be maybe my favorite fit for him in this upcoming draft. At number 5, I have Mason Smith out of LSU with a top 75 grade. He and Leonard Taylor at Miami are both guys that when you're watching them, you've got to watch them with asterisks. Because Mason Smith, when he was fully healthy and getting consistent reps, looked like a first round, maybe even top 20 sort of guy. But injuries were a problem with him throughout his entire career, and generally speaking, injured players or hurt players in college or hurt players in the NFL. And Leonard Taylor out of Miami was just flat out and straight up not used correctly. He played nose tackle, and one of the biggest reasons why this past year I started delineating between nose tackles and 3 or 5 techniques is specifically because of players like Leonard Taylor who were used incorrectly, in my opinion. They basically asked him to line straight up against the center and be a run stopper. He did not get a whole lot of opportunities to rush over a guard this year or have a true pass set. But when he did, I think he had like a 25% pass rush win rate. I think because of the frame, because of the build, because of the athleticism, I do think there is a significant amount of upside with Leonard Taylor, even though the film probably says early to mid day 3. But I think there is enough upside and potential, if used correctly, to where I've got a top 75 grade on him. Rook or Hor-Ho-Ro. Do not ask me to say that again. I'm just going to call him Rook. But he's another guy that I really like as sort of like a Braden Fisk mold of a penetrating 3 technique. However, unlike Fisk, he's in the same boat Rook is as with Justin Eboigbe, I think is how you say it. I don't want to say E-boy, but maybe that's how you say it. He's out of Alabama. Mekhi Wingo also kind of fits that role, but to a lesser extent. But for Rook and Justin, they are both players that I think are going to struggle when being asked to just straight up run defend at the next level. But they do provide a significant amount of upside as a rotational pass rusher in more obvious passing situations. I think they are both players that I am higher on than most people, just because I value that position a lot more than most people do. Final 2 guys, Mekhi Wingo and Michael Hall Jr. out of Ohio State. These are both guys that I kind of just see as like all-around guys who, if they're a starter, you're kind of like, we could probably do better. But if he's a rotational player, you're like, that's a really, really good group of D linemen that you have if that guy's coming off the bench. They're both guys that I think have upside as pass rushers and also possess the ability to perhaps even be solid against the run as opposed to just not being a liability, which is really all you're going to ask for guys like Eboigbe and Rook. Moving on to my edge grades, this one tops out at top 5, goes down all the way to UDFA. This is pretty much the baseline. This is the normal sort of value, is not really taken into account. Just sort of go from the top 5 to undrafted free agent grades. This is sort of the standard version of my grading system. Moving on to the actual players here, Jared Verse is my number 1 edge rusher out of Florida State. I think he's got it all. He wins with speed, he wins with technique, he wins with power. Very good against the run. Very, very good pass rusher. I think day 1 in the NFL, he might be a 10 sack, 50 pressure kind of guy. And I really like Jared Verse. Latu out of UCLA is my number 2 guy. The medicals kind of coming out okay for him at the combine was a big deal. I really like Latu on film. Not as much as some other people, but I do like Latu. And very technically sound, sort of in that Aiden Hutchinson camp where you're not really sure if he's a good athlete or not. But he's so technically sound and he just wins so much that you're willing to take him in the first round. In the actual draft, it would not surprise me if Latu fell out of the first round. But in my rankings, I have him as a top 20 grade. I have Dallas Turner at number 3. And kind of the reason why I have Jared Verse and Latu graded ahead of him, but specifically Latu. Jared Verse, I just think is a better player than him. But Latu might be a little bit of scheme bias. I prefer 4-3 guys to 3-4 guys, but that's just me. I do think Dallas Turner is someone whose production is largely going to be dependent upon scheme and situation that he's placed in, as opposed to someone like Latu, who I think pretty much regardless of scheme is going to be productive. I've got Chop Robinson at 4. He and Dallas Turner are similar type of players. They're both like 6'3", very explosive, very good athletes, can drop into coverage. If you are asked to do that, then they can do it at a fairly high level. I think they're both upside players that maybe year 1 are best utilized as rotational pass rushers, but then by year 3, they're probably every down guys with double-digit sack potential. Braylon Trice out of Washington, I am way higher on him than most people for some reason. I really like Braylon Trice, I guess. I do think he has a little bit of scheme versatility. We're going to talk about scheme versatility with the next few picks after this a lot more. But he does have some upside as a 3-4 outside linebacker, but I do think he would be better off with his hand in the dirt in a 4-3 scheme where he's not asked to do as much. He didn't get home a whole lot, but he was playing in a conference with a ton of very athletic quarterbacks. So there is that as well. But elite winner in pass sets. He just beats everybody. And he went up against some big-time tackles in the Pac-12 this past year, in the final year of the Pac-12. He played against some legitimate NFL prospects at the tackle position. Chris Braswell out of Alabama is up next. He definitely got overshadowed by Dallas Turner, but he tested very well at the combine. He also, looking at the film, is a lot better than people sort of realize. I think he's a better run defender than Dallas Turner. Dallas Turner is a better pass rusher, but Braswell still has a significant amount of upside as a pass rusher, and I really don't have him graded any differently, or at least I wouldn't have him graded any differently if he went to a 3-4 team or a 4-3 team. I think he is one of the very few players in this class that is going to be able to be effective in both of the major schemes. And Adisa Isaac, I think, is somewhat similar. I think he's probably better off in a 4-3, but I wouldn't have him graded any differently if he got drafted to a 3-4 team. I think he has upside there as well. But I really like Adisa Isaac. I think he's very good against the run. And again, kind of got overshadowed by his more athletic teammate. Even though as a player right now, I think Adisa Isaac is probably a better player year 1 than Chop Robinson. But Chop Robinson has that elite caliber upside and that ridiculous get off and bend around the edge, which is why he's a better prospect in my opinion. Next 2 guys, Brandon Dorlus out of Oregon and Marshawn Keelan out of Western Michigan. These are both guys who you could put in the interior defensive line group as either 3 technique, because they are what colloquially has been known as 5 techs, where they play outside the tackle in base, but then move inside in more obvious pass rush situations. And both of these guys are players that I like. More so, Keelan as an actual edge rusher, but I think Dorless has more upside as a quote-unquote chess piece across the defensive line, where you can kind of put him on whoever the weakest defensive lineman is, and he'll probably be able to win more so than Keelan. I think Keelan has more upside in a team that doesn't particularly like to do that, that likes to keep their edge players on the edge. But Dorless, I think, has more upside as a team that likes to move pieces around along their defensive line. Last guy on the top 10 list here is Austin Booker out of Kansas. This is a kid that's got a ton of upside. He's been comped to Shaquille Barrett from Tampa Bay. I don't think he's at Tampa Bay anymore. I think he got cut. But he was a elite caliber edge rusher for like a 3-year span there when they were winning Super Bowls and being in the playoffs. And I kind of see it, but I think, like Shaquille Barrett, he's going to need some time to put it all together at the next level. Okay, so while I was recording the linebacker section of this video, it for some reason recorded at like half volume. And when I tried to edit it to put it back up to a reasonable level, it just got all blown out and it didn't really sound good at all. And I flat out and straight up do not have time to re-record an entire segment of this video. This is the grades. That's what's on the screen right now. And now you're going to see my top 10 linebackers. I don't think it's a particularly controversial list or anything like that. But this is my top 10 linebackers for this class. There are 2 that I would consider taking in the first round, and another guy in Junior Colson that I think is borderline, sort of a first round kind of guy. Anyway, we're going to move on to the next position group here. Safety slash slots corners for the NFL here have the same grading structure, mainly because it's really, really hard to differentiate the 2 positions. There are players in the NFL that are just slot defenders, but very often you will see safeties rotate down into playing the slot. Javon Holland is a very good example of someone who does that, as opposed to someone who is pretty much just a slot corner like a Kenny Moore or a Brian Branch. Even though I don't really think a slot corner will ever get higher than a top 20 grade for me, I have a real hard time saying it's a different position than a safety, so to speak. And in the NFL, the differences between a slot corner and a free safety and a box safety have somewhat become negligible. That little rant about positions aside, Mike Sandersill is my number 1 slot corner in this year's draft class. He is not someone that I think could probably end up playing free safety. I think he's pretty much just a slot corner. I think he's someone that you want to have around the ball or underneath coverage. So he's not really someone that I think you really want to put in the man coverage really a whole lot. He's also not someone that I think you would want to have play in a box safety sort of role. I don't think he's big enough to play for that role. But I will say this, if Mike Sandersill was 2 inches taller and 15 pounds heavier, he would be a top 10 player in this class for me. Mainly because I would probably have him graded as an actual safety as opposed to a slot defender, because I do think that that would be, just based off of his play style, that would be advantageous for him to be able to be that position. But he doesn't have the size to do that at the next level. Number 2, I have Max Melton out of Rutgers. A bigger guy, but I do think his future in the NFL is in the slot. If it isn't in the slot, he's not really a safety. I think he could actually survive as an outside corner. But Max Melton, I think, is at his best in the slot, where he is very, very good. He can play man coverage in the slot, which is not something that is all that common. But he's also very, very productive in zone coverage as well. Javon Bullard, I almost put in the safety group, but ultimately I decided to put him in the slot because this isn't a great slot group. So I think there's a possibility that he ends up being played in the slot because the team needs a slot defensive back more than a safety. I could see that happening. Renardo Green out of Florida State and Daquan Hardy out of Penn State are similar sort of players to go along with Andrew Phillips out of Kentucky. Similar players, undersized, probably can't survive on the outside, but they are, I think, quality players. Specifically, Renardo Green is someone that I think you could play man coverage with as a slot corner. Daquan Hardy, I would not feel comfortable doing that. Andrew Phillips, I would not feel comfortable doing that. Josh Newton, Tyke Smith, Omar Brown, and Tarheeb Still out of Maryland round out the group. Josh Newton out of TCU is kind of a sleeper guy, in my opinion, because he is someone who maybe a position switch is on the radar for him. I think he's a good athlete, and special teams upside is the name of the game for him. Tyke Smith is kind of a guy similar with Mike Sanderson, where if he was 2 or 3 inches taller and 15 to 20 pounds heavier, he'd be in the conversation for the first round. But he's not those things, so he's pushed down the board because the size and the lack of elite agility and long speed that Mike Sanders still has. Not that necessarily Mike Sanders still has elite and long speed, but he ran 4.4, which is very good. But his size and lack of athletic measurements pushes Tyke Smith down the board for me. Omar Brown and Tarheeb Still, at this point in the draft, you're really just looking at guys who could provide special teams value and potentially develop into a contributor in the secondary. That's where I've got those guys graded. Moving on to the safety group here. And before I talk about Tyler Nubin and Kalen Bullock and go down the board here, I want to address the fact that I do not have Cooper DeJean listed here as a safety. I will go more in depth into why I don't have him listed as a safety in the cornerback rankings that I have. But it is a very popular opinion, even among well-respected NFL sort of people in the media, that Cooper DeJean likely ends up as a safety. I do not have him graded as a safety. I have him graded as a corner. And I will talk more in depth about why that is in the cornerback rankings. Now, moving on to the actual safeties here. Tyler Nubin out of Minnesota has first-round safety all over his tape. But where I pause with that is his athletic testing, because, man, it was bad. But I've gotten burned by athletic testing at the safety position, especially a deep safety or a free safety, so to speak, has burned me several times in the past. So I'm just going to go with what I saw on film with Tyler Nubin, and that is a first-round type of player, or at the very least very early into the second round. I think he's a plug-and-play starting safety. I think he's versatile. I think he could play downhill. I think he could play going backwards as well. Kalen Bullock, I think, is more just of like a downhill kind of guy. He's very good in coverage, and he's also someone who's been talked about as maybe converting to corner, which I wouldn't be against, but that's not the position he played in college. So I have him graded as a safety here. Cameron Kitchens is up next, and he is someone where scheme, I think, is going to be more important for him than other players at the safety position in this class. He is not very good in man coverage, but in zone, he's very good. He shows instincts and ball skills in zone coverage, matches well with defenders. Times, passes, and the routes that he takes are very efficient to get to the ball, which led to a ton of takeaways at Miami the past 2 years. I think he had like a 10 or 11 turnovers the past few years. Very, very good player. I like him a lot, but he is one of the more scheme-specific players in this class. If you're going to ask him to be a downhill sort of guy or to play man coverage, he's probably not going to do that at a high level. But if you ask him to be a zone cover guy who's a ball hawk over the middle, I think you're going to get a good player. Jaden Hicks out of Washington State is up next. He's a big guy with NFL size, a prototypical box safety, and he struggles with a lot of things that box safeties generally struggle with. I do have questions about his overall athleticism, although he did test decently in the tests that he elected to do at the combine. He did not elect to run the 40-yard dash. And I think that's likely because the 40-yard dash would have been slow and he would have been pushed down the board by a lot of people. So I think that was potentially a very good decision for him, because at the end of the day, for him and the way that I would use him in a scheme, it's not that important what your 40-yard dash is, because he's a downhill player. He is a hybrid safety linebacker kind of guy, even though he doesn't necessarily have that kind of like mass to him. But that's the role that I'm going to ask him to play. He is a downhill box safety, so to say, and I think he can be successful in that role. Dorian Taylor-Green out of Texas Tech is up next. He was real close to being number 3 and kind of bumping everybody down one spot. But ultimately, he kind of strikes me as a guy that's good at everything, but not elite at any one thing. And Cameron Kitchens, I think, is a elite zone player over the middle of the field. Jaden Hicks, I think, is a very good to great player when working downhill. I think Dorian Taylor-Green is a good player at all of those things, as well as being able to play a actual free safety role and potentially down even into the slot. I just don't think there's a whole lot of upside for him as like a big time player in any one role. If he is going to hit that upside, it's going to be because he does everything really well. Kind of like a Javon Holland role or something like that. Not that he's going to be as good as Javon Holland. I'm not saying that. Moving on to Cole Bishop. He would be graded higher if he wasn't such a risk taker. He gets himself in a lot of trouble by trying to make plays, and that opens up passing lanes. Now, Utah had a very good defense this past year, and he was also surrounded by very good players. So he could kind of afford to go and make plays. Maybe it's because he knew that he was not likely to get burned, so he could take more risks. And maybe if he knows he doesn't have that talent around him, he wouldn't take more risks. I don't know. I don't get to talk to him. I don't get to break down his film with him. Those are questions that I would ask if I was interviewing him at like the NFL scouting combine or stuff like that. But I don't get to ask him stuff like that. So he is pushed down the board a little bit, but I do think he's a versatile player who is a much better athlete than I anticipated him being, specifically when it comes to starting and stopping and changing directions to mirror receivers and stay in zone with them, so to speak. Next on the list is Sion Vaki out of Utah, and I think he's an elite special teams player year 1, so that bumps him up around or 2, maybe, in my opinion. But B, I do think he is going to be someone who, as like a third safety, who you're not really going to ask to do necessarily a whole lot, I think he has some upside as an actual player, because he got exposed and exploited at times in man coverage. But he reads quarterbacks very well in zone coverage. He's clearly an intelligent player, which is something that Utah defenders are known for. He is someone who I think is going to make his living primarily as a special teams player, which, as if you're a day 3 pick, that's likely going to be how you make your living anyway. But I do think he still has some upside in a specific sort of role as an actual football player. Bo Braid out of Maryland, he is up next. And he is someone that, when I was watching Maryland play football, didn't really stand out a whole lot. But looking back at his film, he was a glue guy for Maryland on that defense. He played near the line of scrimmage very well. He played back safety or in a split safety role, and he played that very well. But he doesn't do anything exceptional. He doesn't have the power to be an enforcer going down the field like a Jaden Hicks does. He doesn't have the coverage ability to potentially be a split safety and be very good in that role like a Cameron Kitchens or somebody else. He's kind of a guy who, as a backup player, you're pretty happy to have him because he can just be your backup safety in either role, and hopefully he doesn't have to play a whole lot. But if he does play, you're not going to be too worried about it because he strikes me as someone who's going to be like a third or a fourth safety and just kind of just be not a liability for a team. That's where he strikes me as well as being a prominent special teams player. Last two guys, Trey Taylor and Tyler Owens out of Texas Tech. Tyler Owens was going to put on a show at the Combine, and unfortunately he got hurt while running the 40-yard dash, which we saw a lot of this year, which was kind of weird. I don't really remember seeing a whole lot of people get hurt running the 40-yard dash this year, or in years previous, rather. But this year, it happened like 3 or 4 times, and that was kind of crazy. But nevertheless, both of these guys are core special teams players that I think in very specific roles might have some upside as an actual player on the field. Corners are the last group that we are going to be talking about here today. And as I spoke about earlier with 3 techs, the cornerback group is the other group, one of 3 positions that I allot top 3 designations to, for one reason and one reason only. And that's that having an elite caliber corner or an elite caliber interior pass rusher are the 2 most valuable things that you can have, and they're also extraordinarily rare. So when you combined rarity with high impact, it inherently makes an elite player at that position more valuable. So an elite graded corner is someone that I would consider taking with the first overall selection. And just to kind of make my point here, I would have taken Sauce Gardner in 2022. Was that draft class, 2022? I think so. I would have taken Sauce Gardner with the number 1 pick in 2022. And even though Trayvon Walker took a massive step forward this past year and actually played tremendously well, Sauce Gardner was very clearly the best player in that draft class. And I don't particularly think that having a good to great edge rusher is more impactful than having maybe the best corner in football in Sauce Gardner. Now, there's nobody in this class that's like that. Last year, I think I had Gonzalez graded as a top 3 grade. But this year, there's no guy like that. Quinyon Mitchell is still fantastic, though. Is elite in man or zone, big-time upside in either schemes. It might be a little bit small to deal with the more physical receivers in the NFL, but that wasn't really a problem in college, and I'm not necessarily sure it's going to be a problem in the NFL. It's just a little bit of a nitpick, I would say, nothing really more than that. He's a very clean and technically sound player as well. I really, really like Quinyon Mitchell out of Toledo. Nate Wiggins is my number 2 corner out of Clemson. Partially because he's a very, very good athlete, but also partially because I'm not going to ask him to do the things that people think corners ought to do. If you put Nate Wiggins in a cover 4 or off man scheme, he's going to be a very, very good corner at the next level, which is why I had the Rams take him at 19 in one of my mock drafts that I did. Very, very good player. I love Nate Wiggins. Terrion Arnold is my number 2 guy. If you're looking for a press man corner who could potentially get beat deep because he doesn't necessarily have the long speed of other players, that is Terrion Arnold out of Alabama to a T. Now, luckily for him, he didn't get beat in press coverage very often. He was significantly worse in zone coverage than he was in man coverage, and the same can be said about his teammate, who we'll get to in a moment. But I think that is something that he's going to get better at with experience. He has not been a corner for very long. I believe he was a different position, and then Alabama moved him to corner when he got on campus. So he's still kind of learning the position a little bit, and he does have a significant amount of upside as well. Cooper DeJean at 4. I have him graded as a corner mainly because he took 630 snaps at outside corner, 1 snap this past season at free safety, and 2 snaps as a slot corner. So I don't really understand why people are talking about him converting to free safety or to slot corner. I don't want to say that it's because he's white, but maybe it is. I don't fucking know. But I don't get it at all. And I don't think he fucking needs to be an outside corner. I think he's a top 20 pick as an outside corner. I don't think he needs to change positions. You're just not really going to ask him to be in man coverage a whole lot because he's elite in zone coverage. And that's probably the actual reason why they want to move him to safety, because they pretty much exclusively play zone coverage. But if I run a cover 3 scheme or a cover 4 scheme, or hell, even a cover 2 scheme where it's just zone coverage and it's Cooper DeJean, I'm not like, I'm going to keep him at corner. Like, I don't get the methodology that people have when they're talking about converting him to another position when he's already a top 20 caliber player as an outside corner. It's just that he is a bit scheme reliant. But do you want to know who is also very good in zone coverage, but nobody's talking about moving him to free safety? Kool-Aid McKinstry. He's not very good in man coverage. Now, I think he's better in man coverage than Terrion Arnold is in zone coverage, but Terrion Arnold is significantly better in man coverage than Kool-Aid McKinstry is in zone coverage. All that being said, Kool-Aid McKinstry is very, very good as a zone corner, which is why I don't necessarily think the Lions are going to be interested in him, even though he does have the required length to be a press man corner. He's not very good when asked to do that at Alabama. He's much better as a zone corner. And to get back to the original point that I was trying to talk about here before I got into my Kool-Aid breakdown, Cooper DeJean is arguably an elite prospect as a zone corner. Kool-Aid McKinstry is a very good to great prospect as a zone corner who's not very good in man coverage. And Cooper DeJean is also not very good in man coverage. But Cooper DeJean's white, so everybody's talking about moving him to safety when they're not talking about that with Kool-Aid McKinstry. Even though Cooper DeJean is a better athlete with similar length and size as Kool-Aid McKinstry. So you can't even really hit me with that either. So I don't really understand that whole process or the method in which people are thinking that Kool-Aid McKinstry is a corner for sure, 100%. Nobody's talking about moving him to safety, but Cooper DeJean is getting moved to safety like almost certainly in the NFL. And I don't know how he's going to play as a safety. Like, I don't know how he's going to play as a safety because he doesn't fucking play that position. Now, if you want to bench his ass for 2 years and teach him a new position, go for it. You can do that. I'm not going to. I'm going to keep him as an outside corner where I have a top 20 grade on him. These next 2 players, TJ Tampa and Ennis Rakestraw out of Iowa State and Missouri, respectively, are basically exact opposites. TJ Tampa is 6'1" and 190 pounds with, I think, the frame to maybe get up to 200 if you really, really asked him to do it. He's a good athlete. The long speed is maybe a little bit of a question, but it is what it is. That being said, he kind of needs to work on his technique quite a bit. I'm also not sold on him as a man-to-man corner. Ennis Rakestraw, on the other hand, I think is a man-to-man corner, but the problem is that he's 5'11" and not a very good athlete for the position. And he's excels in press coverage, which is something that TJ Tampa, even though being longer and taller, is not something that he did very well. Rakestraw, that is, just the athleticism is really a problem for me, especially if you're going to take him in the first round. Because if he was 6'1" and ran, what did he run, 4.54 or something like that, mid 4.5s, I can live with it if you got good length. It's just like, okay, cool, you get beat deep. I can have a safety back there, and I can work with that. What I can't work with is a corner that might not physically be able to deal with bigger receivers. And that's just what Ennis Rakestraw potentially is. Kyrie Jackson out of Oregon is up next, and I really like him. But the problem is that he is tremendously scheme dependent. He is not someone that has a whole lot of versatility when it comes to scheme. He needs to be in a press scheme, probably cover 2 or man. And if you're going to put him in man coverage, you might need to keep a safety shaded to his side a little bit in case he gets beat deep. That being said, I really would really love to see him with the Kansas City Chiefs or potentially the Seattle Seahawks if he falls to like the middle of the 3rd round. All that being said, I do like Kyrie Jackson. I think I'm higher on him than the consensus, but I'm more willing to take a risk on a player with that size profile than I am on smaller guys that also don't have the athleticism, so to speak. And similar in kind of like the opposite way that TJ Tampa and Dennis Rickestra were, my opinions of DJ James and Kamari Lassiter out of Auburn and Georgia, respectively, were the exact opposite of pretty much what everybody else was saying originally. DJ James is just the kind of corner that I like. He's got good size, or length, I should say, because he's tall and it's a good arm length. Thin frame, though, which is why I probably shouldn't say size and instead say length, which he does have good length. Kamari Lassiter, not so much. That being said, Kamari Lassiter is way more physical and plays in press coverage a lot better than DJ James. DJ James probably an off corner. The big knock on him was the potential in long speed, and he ran low 4.4s, so that's not really a question anymore. I didn't particularly think it was a question either, really. I think him getting beat was more of a fact that he does have some technical issues that he needs to deal with, more so than it was about his pure athleticism. Kamari Lassiter, very technically sound. I think he's going to be a immediate contributor. DJ James might need some time, which is why potentially if you're a team looking to compete, maybe Kamari Lassiter would be higher on your board than DJ James. But I just really like DJ James. I like that kind of corner. I like the way that he plays, and I just like him, I guess. And that is my top 10 players at every position on the defensive side of the football. So I'm going to go ahead and ask you to like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and if you disagree with me at any point, or you just have something to say, go ahead and drop a comment down in the comment section below. And now with the outro out of the way, there's only one thing left to say, and that's that I'll see you next time.